Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, crime, horror and a tiny bit of sci-fi. It's my March wrap-up. So, time to talk about all the books I read in March. I'm going to start, though, with the DNF. So I finished 19 books in March, but I DNF 3, which is more than normal for me. And I think that partly was because of the fact I've been on this 50 books to read before I'm 50 challenge. And to be honest with you, it's felt like my reading has been a bit too constrained. And I think maybe that's made me feel like I just wasn't in the mood for some of the books I had on that list to read. So it may well be that I go back to them at some point in the future. So the three I DNF then were War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, which I've talked about at length on the channel already. Horned by Joe Hill, which I just wasn't feeling. I've read other Joe Hill books and really enjoyed them. So I've read Nosferatu and I've read The Fireman, and I liked both of those. But this one I just couldn't get into. I couldn't get into the character, and there was just something about it that just wasn't working for me. And then the other one, which surprised me, was Songs for a Dead Dreamer by Thomas Ligotti. And with that one, there was just something about his prose style that just felt like a stumbling block for me. I just couldn't get through it and just wasn't really enjoying the book as a result. So let's talk about what I have read then. So as I say, 19 books finished, and looking through this list, and I've ranked them in order of least enjoyed to most enjoyed, like I normally do. Even the ones right at the bottom of the list, I really liked. So it's been despite those three DNFs, it's been a really, really good reading month for me. I have really, really enjoyed it. And I'm glad I've done this, this challenge where I'm forcing myself to read some books that I just haven't got around to. Books I've been meaning to get to for ages, and I've really enjoyed that experience. Right, so let's talk about what I've read then. So least enjoyed, but still a really enjoyable book, was Infestation by William Meikle, which is the first of his Esquad series. So this is a very silly, very slight, but very enjoyable book. So I read this for Kelsey at Slime and Slasher's Midnight Book Society, or was it her Patreon book club? I can't remember. A book club that Kelsey runs anyway. And it's a book about this kind of special forces team who go to this remote island that's been invaded by, I can't even remember what the creatures were, but like these weird sea creatures that are like giant woodlice type things, and they fight them basically. So it's as much fun as that premise sounds. So yeah, I had a really good time with it. Just ahead of that then, and I guess overall I didn't like this book maybe quite as much, but the good bits of this book were really good. So that book is Kin by Keelan Patrick Burke, which is quite a gruelling horror novel. I did do a review of it on the channel, so you can look back and see that for kind of fuller thoughts. But yeah, it dragged a bit in the middle for me. But the opening is just absolutely fantastic, and there was a lot of interesting stuff in this book. Right. So here's a surprise in terms of I'm surprised by how low this ranked, but I just didn't. I liked it, but I just didn't love it, and that is so from this huge collection, the Big Book of the Continental Lot. The book is Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett. So, or as it's published here, The Cleansing of Poisonville. So it was originally published as 4 instalments in Pulp magazines, and that's what's collected here. Hammett later worked it into Red Harvest as a novel. So about this guy, the Continental Op, who's quite an interesting character, who goes to this town called Personville to like clean up all the corruption, all the crime. So it was good, and there's some good action scenes and things like that. But it just for some reason didn't grip me as much as I expected it to. Okay, moving on then. So next up, we have Suicide Forest by Jeremy Bates. So again, fairly low down the ranking, but still a really enjoyable book. And I am going to do a full review of this on the channel soon. So I read this as a buddy read with one of my patrons, Georgianne Marsh. And this was a really fun horror novel with had loads going on in it. So about this group of tourists who stay in this forest in Japan that's notorious for being a place that people go to commit suicide, and that's probably haunted. They kind of camp there, and all sorts of weird stuff starts happening, and the book gradually ramps up and up and up to a really impressive and enjoyable ending. So yeah, I really had a lot of fun with it. Very slightly ahead of that, Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie, so one of her Poirot novels. So this was good, but I just didn't enjoy it as much as Murder on the Orient Express, which it felt very similar to in a lot of ways. So, classic murder mystery, cosy murder mystery style stuff from Christie, but yeah, maybe not one of her best, or certainly not as good as some of the others I've read by her. Just ahead of that, a really interesting book of a similar vintage to Death on the Nile, so it came out in the 30s. So this is The Countryman Dies by Rudolph Fisher, which is a wonderful detective story with an all-black cast. So Rudolph Fisher was an African American author. This is often called the first African American detective story, and it was just a lot of fun. So this character called the Conjure Man, who's someone who people come to when they want to know the future, or they want to get kind of supernatural information about stuff. He's been murdered, and two people from the community investigate it. So one of them is a detective, the other one is a doctor. So it's a really interesting pairing, definite echoes of Holmes and Watson. Yeah, a nice mystery, well told, and a great sense of place as well. So set in Harlem, and you really get that kind of vibe of Harlem in the 30s. So I had a lot of fun with it. Just ahead of that, and again, I'm going to keep saying this, again, this was a really good book, but it is, in the bottom half of my rankings for the month. So Demons by Daylight by Ramsey Campbell, the British horror writer. So this is a short story collection, a nice selection of different stories. Not a huge collection. I think it's kind of 200 pages or something like that, but some really good stories in there. And what Ramsey Campbell does really well is give you a setting that really feels like an everyday setting, and then inject something really weird into it. So I thought this was a really enjoyable, really creepy collection of stories. Just ahead of that, a disturbing book, and I've talked about this on the channel. I did a review of it. So Crash by JG Ballard, which is a book about basically people who fetishise car crashes. Very strange, as you can imagine. Very graphic, incredibly graphic. It's a bit, you feel a bit removed from the action at times. There's something about Ballard's style that makes it difficult to connect with the characters, not least because of the fact they get off on car crashes. So it didn't grip and engross me as much as it might have, but it's fascinating. It's a really, really interesting book, and some really memorable stuff in there. So yeah, it was good. Just ahead of that, a 50s crime novel from this Library of America edition, so Beast in View by Margaret Millar, which is a really enjoyable story about this woman who is making prank phone calls to people, and well, not even prank phone calls, like nasty phone calls to people, where she reveals things about their private lives and things like that. And the book is about what happens as a result of her actions, and then kind of digs into the why of it. Why is she doing it? So yeah, a really fun, enjoyable suspense novel. A few more Kindle ones ahead of that. So The Quiet American by Graham Greene, his kind of classic novel about the origins of the Vietnam War, but really done as a character study. So a character study between this English guy who's the narrator, an American, so the English guy is a journalist, an American who's like a spy, and this Vietnamese woman who they're both in love with. So just really richly told, and just the atmosphere in this book was fantastic. Really, really liked it a lot. Just ahead of that, Roseanna by not by Martin Beck, featuring Martin Beck, so the first Martin Beck novel. So written by Marge Sjöwall and Per Wahlöö, who I think were a married couple. So one of the original Scandinavian noir novels, came out in 1965, I believe. Just a really good, solid mystery novel. Nothing spectacular, no bells and whistles or anything like that, but just solid detective work. That kind of police procedural kind of detective work that I really quite enjoy. And just gripping and interesting from beginning to end. And Martin Beck is a really interesting central character, so a really good kind of central detective. And just just a really solid mystery. I really liked it. Just ahead of that, and again, I have done a review of this on the channel, Snow Crash by Neal Stephenson, his sci-fi novel from the 90s about virtual reality. So definitely had some flaws, but also had some massive strengths. So really, some really cool set pieces, really interesting concepts and ideas that are well thought through. So yeah, I thought it was really good. Right, moving on then to some horror. So Cunning Folk by Adam Nevill, which, as you may have guessed from the cover of the title, is folk horror. So my first Adam Nevill book, definitely won't be my last. Again, I've done a review of this on the channel. Just really well told. And really gripping because you really connect with the characters. So this young family who are really struggling, who moved into this rundown house and are trying to get it kind of repaired and livable, and their neighbours are completely horrible, and as things progress you realise there's kind of some really weird shit going on as well. So a really good horror novel. I liked it a hell of a lot. Another classic just ahead of that, Call for the Dead by John LeCarre, the first of the George Smiley books. And this is interesting because you think of Smiley as being like a spy character, and indeed he is. You know, he works as a spy, and the book is about him investigating a guy who's like a civil servant who the security services have reason to believe has connections with the Russians. So it's definitely a spy book, but it's also a mystery novel. It's a murder mystery. So it begins with the suicide of this guy that Smiley's investigating, or apparent suicide. And most of the book is about Smiley trying to figure out what's going on. So it really appealed to the mystery lover in me as well as the espionage lover. So yeah, a lot of fun. Just ahead of that then, so Cop Hater by Ed McBain, the first book in the 87th Precinct series, my favourite book series of all time, in case you didn't know. So this was my Patreon book club read for this month, and it was fantastic. I mean, I've read this book a few times, and I still really enjoyed it. Just a classic 50s police procedural, introduces some of the characters. So the first book in this series that went on to have 55, there are 55 books in the series overall. I loved rereading it. It's just beautifully done, and he has such a nice way with dialogue and things like that, McBain. So yeah, hugely enjoyable. So we are down to the final 4. So at 4, we have What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. So a really interesting horror novel that has a lot of interesting stuff to say about kind of gender identity and things like that, but also is a really gripping and creepy retelling of the fall of the House of Usher. So I've done a review of it, which is up on the channel. I thought this was a fantastic book. Really enjoyed it, and I really want to read more T. Kingfisher now. She was an author I'd kind of heard of, partly because of this book, but I didn't realise how much she'd written. But I looked, she's got loads of books out. So yeah, definitely looking forward to reading more by her. Just ahead of that then, Deep Water by Patricia Highsmith. So read this as part of my kind of read through of all of Highsmith's works, which I'm doing with Anne Novella. So again, I've done a review of this on the channel. A fantastic suspense novel, really gripping, really interesting examination of kind of human psychology, and the breakdown of a marriage, and just so much interesting stuff going on in here. So about a married couple where the woman is like a terrible flirt, and the man is completely indifferent and just wants to do his own thing. But actually, he does get wound up by her flirting and her affairs. And the book starts with him telling people at a party that he's killed one of her previous lovers. So just really just beautifully done. Really liked it. Just ahead of that then, so another book from Ed McBain, albeit this was published under his real name, Evan Hunter. So again, I've done a review of this on the channel, and I did question whether I should put this so high in the ratings, but there was so much about this book that I thought was phenomenal. So the book is The Blackboard Jungle, so a book about a teacher going to a kind of rundown, struggling school and trying to get through to the kids, trying to make a difference. What's problematic about this book is, as I discussed in my review of it, the kind of treatment of sexual assault, which is just appallingly badly handled in this book, and that made me want to maybe consider moving it down the rankings a bit. But the good stuff in this book, I think, for me personally, and it will be different for everybody, for me personally, I overweighed the bad, and I thought the good stuff was so good that it's ended up being my number 2 book of the month. The final book then, so number 1. So I wonder if anyone's figured out what it is. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. So not a book I've talked about much on the channel at all, but one I read in the last week or so, which I thought was phenomenal. That is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gillman. So a short story from the 1890s about a woman whose husband kind of forces her to stay in this room where weird stuff starts happening. So a really interesting examination of kind of the way men deal with emotional behaviour from women, and how we often, struggle with that, and how that can turn into a kind of oppression, but also just a fantastically enjoyable and eerie, kind of creepy horror story. I really liked it a lot. Absolutely fantastic. Can't believe I'd never read it. And yeah, not by a mile my favourite book of the month. But definitely a truly excellent book. So, hope you enjoyed that. Let me know if you've read any of the books I talked about and what you thought of them. Let me know what your favourite read of March was. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.